So today we're going to have a little review of these Shore Marsh Watercolour Pencils. You can only buy these in Hobbycraft. Now the Shore Marsh range is exclusive to Hobbycraft, but I'm kind of thinking that it's their own brand because on the back of the packet here it does have the Hobbycraft Trading Limited address and copyright and all that. So I think this is their kind of own brand that is not their basic range personally, but I might be wrong. The whole of the Hobbycraft art section has been taken over by this Shore Marsh range, and in a way I feel like they're pushing out other brands from the store because of this range. I've been ranting about this on my crafty updates for a few weeks now, and I'll probably be ranting on about it a bit more. So this set of 24 pencils was only £16, and when I first picked them up I thought that's a really good price for 24 colours. It comes in very basic packaging, just a cardboard sleeve and a lovely tin. I really like this tin, it's not garish, it's quite subtle and it looks quite nice on the shelf as well. So yeah, there's a good range of colours in here and there's some very nicely chosen names as well. The pink is Flamingo and one of the browns is called Walnut, and some of the other colours don't have such fancy names, just green, blue and peach. But there's also two metallic watercolour pencils as well, one in silver and one in gold, and when I first got these I was quite excited to see what they would look like. And when I first picked this up I thought, oh, that's quite a nice addition, because who doesn't like a little bit of sparkle on their page? So the first thing I thought I'd do was to swatch all of the colours. I don't know why I bother swatching the white, I mean it never shows up on the page anyway. So whilst I'm swatching these colours, I thought I'd better make the point that I am a beginner with watercolour pencils. I've got 3 random watercolour pencils, which I don't know, I've just acquired. One of them I bought by accident, another one I found in the pencil pot, and the third one I actually did buy on purpose. Yeah, I did. But I've used them a little bit since September in my regular sketchbook, and I quite like them. I like the way I can just put a little bit of colour down on the page and then swish with the paintbrush and it just looks like watercolour. I really like that, and I've found it to be a very handy way of adding colour to the page without creating too much mess. So I do have a teeny tiny bit of experience with watercolour pencils, but not very much. And the reason I decided to buy these is because I thought they would be a really handy way to add colour and draw pictures whilst I'm on holiday. Minimal mess, minimal fuss. Just do some sketching and add the water later. So that was why I decided to get these watercolour pencils. Now whilst I was swatching these, my first impressions was that the pigment is very hard to put on the page. I mean, you've got to press quite hard to get a dark colour. Now some of these colours seem to lay down on the paper a lot easier than others. That's some of them were softer than others, but they were still all very hard compared to my other watercolour pencils. And then when it came to blending them with the water, what I found was that some of the colours blended far easier than others. I was trying to use the same amount of water on each of the swatches, but I just found that on some of the colours the pigment didn't pick up very well. The greens, they seemed to pick up very well. The yellows, they also picked up very well. But I didn't feel the same with any of the other colours. The gold and the silver pencils had a very subtle sparkle in them, but once they were dry, that sparkle kind of just disappeared a little bit. So super excited to get going. I set to in my sketchbook, and yeah, composition aside, I didn't love it. I drew everything out, I added my water, and I don't know, the colours just didn't blend very well, and some of the colours left behind a lot of pencil marks, and some of the colours they were very wishy-washy. So I tried again, and I tried to make this one simpler because I wanted to play around with the blending. And I figured that maybe I hadn't added enough pencil to the page on the previous drawing, so I added more pigment on this page, and I still felt that the water was just lifting the pigment off the page, but still leaving behind pencil marks. I'm not sure if I can really explain it properly. It would just lift up the pigment, so I was left with almost a white space. And even though I was only using a very small amount of water, the pigment was just kind of all soaking into the brush and not staying on the page. So at this point, I decided I was going to do some comparison swatching with my 3 random watercolour pencils, comparing them to these watercolour pencils. My other watercolour pencils, I have one Caran D'ache, I have one gold Faber Aqua, which is Faber Castell, and I have another Faber Castell Aquarelle. During this comparison, I very quickly realised that I wasn't wrong about the pigment on these watercolour pencils being very hard. The Caran D'ache was the softest to apply to the paper, and the Faber Castell were both kind of like the same softness to apply to the page, and they were very close, they were very similar. So I did try to apply the same pressure to all of the squares, and I'd also tried to add the water in the same way, and the one that gave off the most pigment was the Aquarelle, the Faber Castell Aquarelle, followed by the gold Faber Aqua. The colours were just so much more intense on the branded pencils than the Shore Marsh ones. And the Shore Marsh swatch was the only one that left behind pencil lines. The Faber Castell pencils both gave off the most pigment with one stroke of the water. And the last row I was just, light to dark, I just did 3 strokes, not really blending, just wiping. And again, it was the Faber Castell pencils that pretty much all dissolved. So without a doubt, I really did feel like the Faber Castells were winning hand down. So at this point, having done my swatches with the branded pencils, I felt a bit hard done by with these Shore Marsh Hobbycraft watercolour pencils. So I tried again, and I drew one of my favourite pictures, some abbey ruins. I found that the grey pencil that I was using didn't really give me a very good grey, so it wasn't very dark. So I added a little bit of the black, and that just gave me a really dirty effect on the page. Yeah, it was just really grubby looking. So I wasn't very happy with the result of that drawing either. And at this point I thought, okay, well look, every time you get a new art material, you usually draw an apple. So let's go back to basics and draw an apple. So that's exactly what I did. don't mind this picture of an apple because I think the pencil marks that have been left behind add to the picture. So I still found that the colours weren't really blending and there's an awful lot of pencil marks, but on this drawing of an apple, I really don't mind. I wasn't too bothered. So feeling a little bit fed up, I did what I always do. I spent a little bit of time on YouTube and I did find a video from a very good watercolour artist, a watercolour pencil artist, and I'll pop the link in the video description. Basically what she'd done was got hold of some really cheap watercolour pencils and tried to show how you can make the best out of them. Well, that's clearly what I needed, right? So 2 of the ways that she suggested to do it didn't involve using the pencils like pencils at all. The first one though was, and what she suggested was to just use the pencils very lightly. Don't press so hard that it leaves pencil marks behind, because when you add extra pressure it can indent the paper. I wasn't convinced by this because the paper in this sketchbook is very good quality paper, and I tried to draw some very light circles on the page. Yeah, that wasn't great either. So I thought, okay, let's just do a background with some really hard scratchy lines on it. So I tried that as well, and that didn't look great either. Still feeling quite disheartened with these pencils. I tried the second way to use these watercolour pencils is to use a wet brush and wipe it around the nib of the pencil and then use the brush on the page. It did work, but I did feel that the colours looked so washed out. And the third way that she suggested was to make a colour palette by scratching down on an old piece of paper and then lifting the colour from the paper palette and then adding it to your drawing. In my opinion, if I'd wanted a palette of paint, I would have just used my watercolour paints and not the pencils like this. But this is about trying to find ways to make these cheap pencils look good. So I persisted with trying out these different techniques and different backgrounds. I definitely didn't like using the paper palette. I just found, even though with these pencils the pigment soaks into the paintbrush very easily, I still felt the results were very just wishy-washy, I suppose. I tried again using the paintbrush directly on the pencil nib, and as I was doing this I kept splashing water, pigmented water, onto my page, and I quite liked the effect of that. And I thought, oh, I'll tell you what we're going to try. We're going to try completely wetting the page and then just allowing the colour to drip off the pencil as I'm turning the brush around it, and see what happens. Well, this was a result. I was managing to create some very, very nice little backgrounds. Using a paintbrush on the tips of the pencils onto damp paper gave a really lovely watercolour effect, and in fact I think they're even better than my backgrounds that I do with regular watercolour paint. The downside of this is that it's very, very messy, and I have to keep remembering that the whole reason I got these watercolour pencils was to have minimal mess whilst I was out and about. I love it. If this is the only way that I can get use out of these pencils, that's better than wasting £16. So in conclusion, the positive side of this set, well, it's got a nice tin. It's got a nice tin that fits my other loose pencils, so I've been able to switch out some of the really bad colours. I can't really say that it's a good range of colours because some of these colours just do not blend very well at all. And the browns and the blues I have the most problem with. The browns in particular, the colour just lifts off the page and it really loses its vibrancy. And the blues are particularly bad for leaving pencil marks behind. So yeah, in conclusion, these pencils are hard to apply. my arm was actually aching on some of the drawings. I have quite weak upper body strength at the moment, and that's how hard I was having to apply these pencils to the page that it made my arm ache by the time I'd finished an A5 drawing. These pencils are awful at blending, and the colours are very, very pale. Some of these pictures that I did, I went back later and I zhuzhed them up a little bit with my Inktense. And so I thought these might actually be fine for just little sketches on the go whilst I'm out and about, but I'm not convinced. A lot of these colours are what I would call non-colours. The grey is awful. The white I just won't use because these colours don't blend together. If you put two colours on the page together, there's no blending that happens. There's just no blending. As for my little pixies, they look like pencil drawings. I don't mind the pencil marks on them. Some of these I have zhuzhed up again with my Inktense a little bit. So I think I can still use these pencils for certain things, but not for such a broad range of things as I was hoping to use them for. I was hoping to use them in my neurographic art, in my sketches, in, well, everything really. So as you can see by the length of these pencils, I have given them quite a good hammering over the last few weeks. And I think the best way for me to get any use out of them whatsoever is to use them as a base and then zhuzh up with the Inktense later. And the other thing is they are very, very good for these backgrounds, these paint flicky splashy backgrounds. I'm loving that, and I'm getting some really good results from that technique. I have switched out the white for my olive, my Gold Faber Aqua, and I've switched out the black, which was just so muddy and horrible. I've switched that out for my Aquarelle. And the grey one, which washes out to nothing, I got rid of that and I've made room for my Caran D'ache in there. So it's handy that my other pencils will fit in there, and I can then replace maybe some of the blues and the browns. I might even pick up some loose ones to replace the blues and browns in there because I'm not very keen on them. So yeah, that's my review of these Shore Marsh watercolour pencils. I don't recommend them. I'd be really interested to know if anyone's got any other tips and tricks for using cheap and nasty watercolour pencils. I'd also be very interested to know if anyone else has tried anything else in the Shore Marsh range. Anyway, thank you very, very much for watching. And if you've got any questions or anything to add, just pop them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as I see them.